tell you that. So, a look at the future of Heroku. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Peterson, Senior Director of Product Management at Heroku. So I wanted to talk about the 12-factor App Manifesto. I assume that many of the people here have heard of it before, but for those who may not have, it is a set of principles that Adam Wiggins, one of the co-founders of Heroku, published over a decade ago that are really some of the core fundamental tenets that shaped those opinionated values of Heroku that we've been talking and showing you through the course of the day. They are your code base, your dependencies, your config, your concurrency model, your backing services, your build and release and run, processes, disposability, logs. I'm falling behind the animation. But each one of these is a detailed section on the 12-factor app website that talks about the best practices here. And these were the founding principles that really define the for lack of a better term, the API interface between an app developer and the platform that they host on. These are the contracts that the platform is making with the developer that says, if you build your app these ways, we will scale gracefully, we will inject variables, it'll scale horizontally, and we'll make sure that everything just works for you. So this is really that same contract between everything that we do at Heroku. This has been foundational to everything that we do and how we design our products. You saw config variables in Julian's demo as a way of changing what API services you're using. They're even injected when you provision a database. So instead of the database being hard-coded or something like that as part of our API, when you provision a Heroku Postgres database, we just create an environment variable that says database URL, and then your app picks that up at runtime. Similarly with Valkey and other services. So instead of having proprietary APIs, environment variables are the way that you do these type of integrations. Similarly with port binding, we publish a port variable and your app binds to that. And even in a multi-tenant environment where you can't always guarantee you'll be able to bind to port 80, your app works wonderfully. We can scale on a single host that may not have an infinite number of ports by doing these type of integrations. We are actively soliciting feedback on a revision to the 12-factor manifesto, by the way. So we're looking at modernizing things like app identity, logging, and telemetry. So if you are at all interested, check us out on GitHub.
So I was going to say, we announced, we open sourced this week, and we announced it this morning. There's going to be, forget where we posted it, but if you're interested, there are a few kind of like discussion groups happening throughout the week here, and then there'll be more discussions at the happy hour we're hosting on Wednesday. So our chief architect is here, as well as some of our key maintainers from the open source that work on the open source projects at Heroku. And this project already has a lot of folks from places like Intuit, AWS, IBM, some other like folks participating independently. So going beyond the app, like there's app services and like how this could apply from a systems perspective too. So if you're interested, would love to have you part of it.
Yeah. Frankly, given it's over a decade old, I think it's held up amazingly well that we're only just trying to patch it now. So thanks, Adam. We really appreciate the work you put into getting this right the first time. So talking a little bit more, roadmap, the future of Heroku. We've shipped a number of features in 2024, particularly around scalability, has been a big theme of Heroku. We wanted to make sure that customers couldn't outgrow us as a platform, that we had options no matter what you needed in terms of scale. So some of those dyno options that you may have just seen in the demo, up to 128 gigabytes of memory, were new things that we started launching this year. We believe definitely in horizontal scaling, that's the better way of scaling, but there are apps that need vertical scale. There are apps that build complex artifacts or binary processing that need that extra memory, and we want to make sure that we have solutions available for those. At the same time, we've also made it so that smaller dynos are available to our enterprise customers. And so we're really trying to push the boundaries on how big we can go, as well as how small we can go, so that there's always a solution that's available that fits the needs of your business. We've been modernizing our language support. We've launched support for PNPM, which is a dramatically faster package manager. And so if you're using Heroku's build packs, which you are unless you're doing something special, when you saw our demo where you do git push Heroku main, you are using our build packs, which will automatically pick up and use package management for you. So we made your builds faster without you really having to do anything. We're also adding support for poetry for Python, and in general, just keeping up with the entire language ecosystem. We did something like 100+ language releases in 2024 so far. So again, another thing that you don't have to manage yourself, because our languages team does all those patches for you, and the next time you do a build, you pick up those releases. One more thing you don't have to think about. We launched larger Postgres plans with up to 1 terabyte of memory so that even our largest customers can't saturate our databases. Because again, we don't want you to outgrow Heroku. We want to make sure that you can grow your business, and your success should be a shared journey and not something that causes an attrition. We've launched new versions of Postgres. We launched support for Valkey. We've partnered with other Salesforce teams. The Mulesoft Flex Gateway is a very powerful API gateway and management solution from the team at Mulesoft, who knows APIs like the back of their hand, that now runs in Heroku private spaces. So private networking inside your private space, where everything is funneled through an API gateway, where you can use Mulesoft to enforce standards in terms of authentication, in terms of compositing APIs, etc.
Can you talk to us a little bit about sort of your thoughts and plans on how you back up and protect your environment? So if something, you fat finger something, how do you recreate your environment?
Yeah. Well, one of the nice things about your apps is they're effectively stateless. If you fat finger your app, just roll back. I mean, one of the 12-factor manifestos is like the app itself should be stateless. In terms of Postgres, we do have backups available.
I'm thinking more about your actual environment. So you've got a whole bunch of stuff that you've put together. You've got 10 apps running. You've got separate configs for each app. You've got separate protection. You have separate users who have access. You've got, your DNS mapping, all sorts of stuff that you've configured. Now, what happens when one of your developers goes and says, hey, let's delete that, but that was your production environment. Now you have to go, how do you go and protect that or recreate that sort of configuration?
Got it. Yes. So you can absolutely do app level access controls. So you don't want to give your developers access to modify production. You want to give them access to things earlier in your pipeline. So you want to let them create preview apps that then get promoted to your staging app, that then gets promoted to your production app, so that the number of people who have access to production, principle of least privilege, absolutely applies on Heroku. And there are app and team and space level permissions that help you enforce that. There are Postgres followers, there are Postgres backups. You can pull a lot of this information through the API. So it really depends on how paranoid you are and how much you want to back up. But again, the app being effectively stateless, you can dump the environment variables and add-on configs and recreate it with a shell script very quickly with Heroku CLI if you're so inclined. All right. Yeah, we did a whole bunch more. We did automated certificate management, so you don't have to bring your own TLS certs, because that's a pain that nobody should have to do in the era of Let's Encrypt. Shout out to Let's Encrypt for being an awesome partner. Increased security on our configuration variables, so you can mask them. A number of other security improvements, but fundamentally, the theme of this year was scalability and getting all the boring stuff right, so that there's less things you have to worry about on Heroku, so that we can have a strong foundation to build upon.
Either now or with Julian, could you go into a little more detail with the automated certificate management?
Sure. Do you?
I mean, you don't have to live demo it. I just wanted
Okay.
some more info.
When we break, we'll show you. But yeah,
Okay.
Effectively, it just works. We give you a cert and manage it for you, and do all of the ACM Let's Encrypt client is just part of the Heroku platform. So you can bring your own certificate if you want something like extended validation, the green check and old IE versions. But almost nobody does that. Pretty much everybody just says, let ACM manage it. Heroku does it for you. Go for it.
As we've been going through this, it's not necessarily about this page in particular, but we've gone through this and I've seen a kind of specific style of application in the demo. But you also very early on said you wanted to try and show more of a breakout into bigger customers or other things. How complex can I get? I mean, a 3-tier app is okay. It's like, yeah, okay, I can do it pretty much anywhere. But like, what if I've got things that are not necessarily traditional microservices, but maybe a larger service-oriented architecture, event-driven architecture, 50, 100 different things. Where's the boundary? Where can I go with this before I think, actually, I'm architecting myself out of the platform?
Yeah. This is definitely the area where I would personally recommend private spaces. You can do this on common runtime, but it gets a little bit trickier. The private networking capabilities that let you put these services effectively within the private network and then only have certain ingress and egress gateways be your internet-facing footprint, you can create multiple process types for apps. So Julian showed us managing web processes, but you can create multiple types of background processes. So you can have asynchronous worker processes. We have a managed Kafka offering if you want to do Kafka-based event queuing and have workers that pull things off the queue. You can have PDF generation as a background process. You can really scale the process model as much as you want. Web is the one type of magic process that we automatically expose to the internet for HTTP traffic. Everything else in a private space, if you want to build services that accept gRPC, but only to the other apps within your private space, we have customers who do that, who build these private APIs, and then they have a couple of web dynos that hit all the different gRPC endpoints inside of their private space to compose responses, GraphQL across distributed systems, things like that. So you can get fairly complex. I haven't seen a lot of use cases other than really particular networking opinions that don't play with our routing infrastructure on the absolute extreme edge of complexity. But other than that, I haven't really found a place where it falls apart. It adds complexity, and you have to think about how you structure your applications, but that's true of any type of complexity that you're adding. So what's coming for Heroku? Enhanced networking. I talked about how networking was one of the areas that you can push things to the breaking point. We just launched HTTP2 support. And we did that at the router level, which proxies HTTP1 to your application. So you can turn on HTTP2 without having to change your app at all. HTTP2 to the actual dyno. So if you're running modern Ruby on Rails applications and you want HTTP2 all the way through, and you know that your app and your frameworks deal with all the edge cases properly, that's something that's coming in the next few months. Launching a VS Code extension for the people who live their life in their IDE and don't ever want to look at our web dashboard. We already have a lot of people who live their life in the CLI. We like our dashboard, but we know what developers are like. You don't want to break out of your flow state. Having real-time access to scale, inspect resources, et cetera, inside your IDE is something that helps keep you in a flow state longer. We're expanding our language lineup with support for .NET. This will launch in December, but this is C#, F#, NuGet, the Blazor front-end framework, ASP.NET. It's the full thing with the power of Heroku support and consulting behind it as well. We have 2 pilots that we launched at Dreamforce, Heroku Eventing and Heroku Integration, both of which are building upon the Salesforce connection. So what Julian showed us a moment ago was the ability to do database integration. What we now are launching is the ability to do event-driven integration. I think Kafka events, but Salesforce has platform events instead with the PubSub API, if you know Salesforce. But if you don't, the great news is you don't have to. You provision an add-on and say, I want to listen to these events from Salesforce, and they get delivered to your dynos, authenticated as they're coming from Salesforce, and there's a little SDK that lets you call back into Salesforce with that same user context attached. So you can subscribe to change events from Salesforce, custom events from Salesforce, and even publish events back to Salesforce, or even between Heroku apps with a lightweight, easy-to-use add-on that's fully managed by Heroku. Similarly, Heroku integration is about making API-driven integrations. You publish an open API specification and import that into Salesforce. And all of the authentication is managed for you. All of the verifying that it came from the Salesforce organization that you were authenticated with is managed for you. And instead, you just get the raw responses. But those also show up in various tools across Salesforce. If you've been following Salesforce news, Agentforce is the new hip thing. They show up in Agentforce Builder. They show up in Flow Builder. They show up in Apex. And again, I mentioned earlier that we tried to design this so that the point of integration between Heroku and Salesforce was where Salesforce admins can understand the technology. Hey, these just show up as actions in Flow. Cool, I can throw it over the fence. And the Heroku developer is publishing an open API spec and doesn't have to worry about all the nuances of Salesforce authentication, how to manage interaction with flow, etc. Each side of that equation is within their element and somewhere they're comfortable, with this being the glue that ties them together as a managed service. Wildcard domain for Heroku ACM is something we just launched. We have our new networking roadmap. HTTP3 is on the horizon for next year, as well as MTLS to the dyno. So if you want to have MTLS verification at the dyno level, something we're actively working on right now. The VS Code extension, add-on discovery, unified developer tools, seamless integration, and my favorite part is this little list of resources up here is streaming. So when you scale your app, it shows your new dynos booting, and you can actually watch them come up in real time. You can attach add-ons, including provisioning Postgres, etc. I'm running low on time, so I'm going to start going through this pretty quick. But again, .NET joins the other 8 supported language ecosystems on top of Heroku with a fully supported build pack. So you don't have to write Docker files or do anything other than write your app and git push Heroku main, and we take care of building and running your app from there. Something that developers have loved from day one is not having to touch our API to deploy an app, doing it through Git. I'm going to create my pull request, and then I'm going to create a sample app by doing 2 git push commands and not having to worry about anything proprietary is something that developers have been a huge fan of. We have our enhanced integrations with improved productivity. Sorry, given I have 2 minutes left, I'm trying to think about where I want to spend my time. And I want to tease why we're at KubeCon. So on the horizon, a little bit further than the immediate roadmap. One of the reasons that Heroku has such a big presence at KubeCon this year is that we're seeing Kubernetes emerge as an obvious new standard in the ecosystem. I think everybody here probably agrees with that statement, probably even a little bit more forcefully than the language I used. We see that AI is everywhere, but we see that there's a lot of cloud-native challenges. At the Lightning Talks this morning, the CNCF pulled up a slide of the 100+ CNCF projects that you have to navigate when you're trying to build out your own Kubernetes infrastructure, when you're trying to build out your own internal developer platform, and talked about the challenges in trying to pick the right tools, build the right expertise, and manage all that. So this is what we've seen from the market. And that means what's next from Heroku. And I'm going to be a little bit vague because there's some upcoming announcements, and I don't want to steal all of our marketing team's thunder. But you can read between the lines a little bit and start to see where we're going, especially from some of the logos here. We've been working for well over a year to re-platform Heroku to open standards. We'll have some interesting announcements coming in the next few months. But you may notice a couple of those logos. Cloud Native Build Packs, a CNCF incubating project that we've been a major contributor to, is likely going to replace Heroku Classic Build Packs, which are technically proprietary because we built something before an open standard existed. There's an open telemetry logo there. Maybe we're leaning into the CNCF ecosystem a little bit more dramatically than we have in recent years. We're also leaning heavily into a major partnership with AWS. So Salesforce signed a huge partnership with AWS. That's one of the reasons you can actually buy Heroku from the AWS marketplace now. And we've been looking at the services we use and thinking about where we can get extra value out of newer AWS services and rehoming some of our services onto more interesting and opinionated AWS technology. There may or may not be a logo for AWS Aurora on this slide, which would definitely fit into our Postgres strategy. And refreshed opinions. The 12-factor App Manifesto, the refresh of that, is really going to be the manifesto and our core values for what we do for the next decade as we build this type of platform and we build our new foundations.